Okay, so let's get started with our webinar. Today is all focused on SPDX 2.2. The latest version of the software bill of materials standard came out just a few days ago. This is a particularly important release of SPDX because we're getting a lot of traction in areas not just corporate but also governmental. And we've also seen profiles or approaches to using SPDX coalescing with something called SPDX Lite that came out of Japan. We're going to have Kate talking about SPDX 2.2, and we're going to have Ito-san talking about SPDX Lite. So in general, we're going to have an overview of the latest version of the standard, and then we're going to talk about one particular implementation that is particularly useful for certain supplier cases. Okay, so Kate, if it's okay with you, I'll hand over for an overview of how SPDX 2.2, the latest version of the software bill of materials standard, works and why that's important.
Thank you very much, Shane, and thank you for inviting me to talk about SPDX 2.2 today. And thank you very much again for the colleagues in Japan who've been helping us with SPDX Lite. To give you guys a little bit of a background, we started working on SPDX back in 2010, so we've been sort of working on SPDX now for about 10 years and have had various versions coming through. And then in 2015, we came out with the 2.0 version of it. And then later into 2016, we enhanced it. And then we've been in a bit of a quiet spot as we moved over from Google Docs into GitHub. And now we're back into a cadence again with the SPDX 2.2 coming out this month. So there's been a bit of a pent-up set of features since 2016 that people have wanted to see. So some of these things you'll have seen emerge before, but or you've been hearing discussions, but now they are formally in the spec and we have it tagged and it is released. So first off, I'd like to say thank you. I see some of the names on this call who've also helped give contributions into the specification. Everyone who's been contributing to SPDX since it started and who's wanted to be listed has been listed now. If you do think you've contributed and we are not listing you here and you'd like to be listed, please let us know. We're trying to be very inclusive about the people because it does take a whole group of us to figure out how to make these things work in so many different use cases. So one of the first things you'll notice about SPDX 2.2 is we now support more file formats. Underneath the SPDX, there's a data model. And this gives us a tremendous amount of power to be able to sort of move from one file format to the next. Up till 2.1, we had spreadsheets being able to go to RDF, going to what we call tag value or .spdx files. And we were able to move back and forth between them because we had a model underneath us. In 2.2, we're also adding the YAML, the JSON, and a beta version of the XML. We are actively looking for people who have expertise in XML to help us harden up that version. And so it's the intention that we should be able to do it as well. Like I say, there is a prototype there, but we didn't feel confident declaring that we had got the final one because we just didn't have enough testing on it. But we have a pretty strong JSON and YAML versions right now, and you can pretty much go back and forth between JSON to RDF and to YAML to JSON and so forth, because we have this ability to do modeling. One of the other things that we've come up with in 2.2 is there's now recommended naming conventions. People have been doing these sort of things ad hoc up till now, but SPDX now has its own MIME type for the tag value field because there wasn't an equivalent. And then we have the expected, RDF, JSON, YAML, and the suffixes. So if you're using files in specific formats and you want to make it easier for the tools to recognize what you're doing, the recommended conventions and extensions are these. We're also working with Diana on some of the types for applications. And so that's an area that's under investigation right now, but that'll be coming later. So at the heart of an SPDX 2.2 document, it looks pretty much like an SPDX 2.1. We haven't added any new sections. We've just added some more fields and relationships. We have made sure that we're clarifying that it's more than just licensing that is being communicated by SPDX documents these days. There's also various metadata information associated with the software. Some of the interesting lessons from last year, working with the SPDX Lite community, is a strong desire to just basically have software bill of materials say what the components are and how they relate to each other, and not carry a lot of information with them. We also saw this trend echoed in some of the work that was being going on in the NTIA work group in the US, where they had a framing group that was focused again on what is the minimum viable software bill of materials and how can we represent it. And so I was seeing the SPDX Lite desires as well as the NTIA desires, and was like, oh, okay, I guess we need to go in this direction and be able to represent metadata information without a lot of other things, or let people choose what they want to represent. So we did a couple minor adjustments to our mission and charter to be clear that we are looking at software package metadata across the software supply chain process, which very nicely complements what we're trying to do with OpenChain. So one of the new things in the SPDX 2.2 specification is the SPDX Lite profile. And this is basically a valid SPDX document, so all the existing tooling should work with it. But it's just highlighting the fields that you must include in order to convey this information. And as you can sort of see, it's a subset of the fields that are in an SPDX document. And they are together, they all make a valid something that can be parsed and pushed through the model to transfer between formats, as well as to be used in the supply chain and be also able to be filled in manually, since that was one of the use cases that we wanted to be able to still capture. And other things that have been sort of emerging in the last few years is the reuse software initiative out of Europe, from the Free Software Foundation Europe, wanted to start storing more than just license information, the SPDX license identifiers. They wanted to store things like copyright and some of the other types of file properties. So there's another new appendix in the specification for file tags, which let you use some of the file information that's in the file section with a prefix in front of it so that the tooling can recognize it. This is handy if things are not clearly documented and you want to sort of convey additional information with your source code directly. And the reuse group out of Europe has tooling for linting and then also generating SPDX documents from reviewing the source if you are using these tags and conventions. So it makes it a pretty powerful story for people to work with, and makes it possible for something out in the open source, like some of the upstream projects, to be able to make sure they have clean licensing and generate these reference documents very easily. Another new trend that we had is the external repository identifiers have been added in. For the last couple of years, there's been a lot of interest in the concept of package URLs or PURLs. And our package manager in the external repository identifiers now recognizes them. And the other one that's been really interesting to watch emerge has been the software heritage IDs, or SWIDs. And they are persistent identifiers that refer to the base of the source. And so the SPDX has been extended to let these identifiers be used to link a package to this type of information in a fairly seamless way. Prior to this, we also had security information like common package enumerations, or CPEs, as well as Maven and NPM and so forth. So this just extends this capability to what's being used in the industry these days and hopefully make it more effective for SPDX to work with these other constituencies and connecting up with these data sources. Another new area that came in from in this 2.2 is we're seeing a lot of requests coming in for more relationships so they can describe how one package relates to another or how one set of files relates to another. So with 2.2, there was actually 13 new relationships defined. A lot of them came in as a result of the open source software review toolkit. They requested a fair number of these. In fact, most of them, I think, and because they had this information that they were keeping in their tool and they wanted to be able to share it in the supply chain and explain various relationships. The other change in the relationship section is the concepts of, we've always had none and no association with licensing. We've also added this to be able to work with relationships where you can basically use no assertion to say when things are unknown. So you might think you might have a relationship here, but you don't have direct evidence. You're not sure if this file is dynamic or not, something like that. You can now express known unknowns to say, signal that there may be something here, but you're not explicitly certain. This came about as a result of some of the NTIA framing working groups, and they wanted to be able to model this for the security work. Another field that came in the package file and snippet section was as a result of a request from Pathology. They wanted to be able to share the attribution text that comes along with in the source files in order to comply with various licensing. So this gave a spot where any attribution text could be represented verbatim rather than reconstructed later, to make it easier for once you've done the scanning and you've identified it, that you can generate out the appropriate artifacts. And so Pathology had asked for this, and so this is now visible and available. Another appendix that's been there for a bit longer has been the reuse. We actually have been using it in practice now for quite a bit, but we didn't actually have it documented in this appendix. And so we did add this, this was added in a couple years ago and is now formally part of the 2.2 release. So you can actually add, you can use license ref now. And so if your license ID is not on the license list, this gives you a convention so that you can use your company proprietary licenses or some other terms inside your file and still have a way of referring to them even if they're not on the license list. So that was new. There's also a wide range of other improvements. The license matching guidelines got an update, and our appendix one, our first appendix, so the license list itself was updated to 3.8. This, of course, has now become we just released 3.9 a couple days ago. So these things move pretty quickly on the license list compared to the specification. But we have a much more current license list in there. And then there was a lot of formatting and grammatical and spelling fixes that we've been catching now that we're all in Git and we can actually keep a reasonable history. So moving to Git has helped us with improving the quality of our release of the specification, as well as highlighting things that we needed to work on. And so we have been. And I think that gives you a pretty good summary of what's been happening in 2.2. Right now, the SPDX tools for Java are already supporting 2.2. The Python and Go ones are in progress. And the team is now working on what we're going to be putting into SPDX 3.0. And so we are very interested in use cases that you don't think can be supported with what we have today. So we can assess and we can work with you in figuring out what the best way to represent things are. And anyone who's interested is welcome to join in on the mail list, of course. And there's a Tuesday call every week in a time that's not friendly for Asia, but there's a once-a-month call with the Asian team. And if you're interested, let me know and I'll happily add you to our invite for that if you want to learn a bit more about what we're doing. Right now, we're sort of looking at some more supply chain use cases. And there's some work going on with Endo-san on some of the concepts he wants to be able to represent for that. And that hopefully gives you a bit of a flavor for what is now there with SPDX 2.2. I hope you find it useful, and thank you again to this OpenChain Japan community for the work you've been doing on the SPDX Lite and your contributions into 2.2.
Thank you, Kate. Just a question on my end relates to things like the engagement with NTIA. So there have been quite a few discussions with NTIA over the last few months. What's your impression of the importance in this engagement with NTIA in terms of US government adoption of SPDX, and perhaps even more broadly, how will working with the US NTIA potentially help SPDX on a global scale?
Well, the NTIA group has been tasked with trying to figure out what's working in the field and what the best practices before there's any guidance given by some of the regulatory authorities. And they're actively working on exchanging information in the healthcare field. Right now, there's a set of device manufacturers as well as a set of hospitals that are exchanging software bill of materials between them to see what works. Prior to this effort, they were wondering whether or not they had to create their own format. Last year, we pretty much demonstrated that yes, they could use SPDX. They could also use something called software identifiers or SWIDs, which is a NIST standard to exchange the information. Both formats were working fairly well and conveyed sufficient information for the minimum viable. Each handled slightly different things fairly well, but SPDX was recognized as able to handle most of the use cases that they were identifying at this point. This is all coming in from the security side more than the licensing side. So we're seeing this different domain, but both of them need to know what you have in order to make sure that you are either adhering to the license or being able to identify if there might be a vulnerability. The underlying need is the same. The automobile and manufacturers have the same sorts of needs as well. And so while there's a proof of concept going on in the medical space and the FDA is very interested in it, there's also the need to represent some of these informations for other use cases and other market segments. And so the NTIA is trying to bring together a multi-stakeholder process to identify what's most important. And in last year's reports, they recognized SPDX as one of the formats that could satisfy what had been looked for so far. And we're trying to work with them to make sure that SPDX evolves in a direction that will be useful in future as well.
As a mental model, should we regard SWID and SPDX as two competing standards or two adjacent standards?
I'd say they're adjacent. SWID came from more of the space of managing assets in systems. And so it has more facilities in it for, oh, I'm running this piece of Windows on my system in this large company. How many licenses do I have totally? And so it came more from that type of inventory aspect, whereas SPDX has come more from the licensing and open source perspective of what the licensing is and so forth. Both formats can represent what's considered minimum viable and can be interchanged between the two of them. But there's areas where SPDX is clearly stronger in licensing issues, and SWID is stronger in sort of inventory management. So they're complementary, and what we're trying to do is make sure that we can have interchange as much as possible between them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kate. Just opening the floor up to everyone. If you have any questions, now is the perfect time to hop in. All right, if there are no questions right now, we're going to switch to a little bit of a deep dive into the SPDX Lite profile that Kate mentioned. This is an implementation of SPDX to fit a certain series of requirements that were identified by companies in Japan. We're going to have Ito-san present on this topic. Ito-san, is it okay to hand over to you to speak about SPDX Lite?
Yeah, thank you for giving opportunity of the presentation. Let me share my presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah. Okay, and wait for a moment, please. Today, I will have the presentation about the background of the SPDX Lite which proposed to be integrated in the SPDX reference SPDX definition of the 2.2. I'm a member of the sub-work group of the OpenChain Project Japan work group named License Information Exchange SFD. And we proposed the SPDX Lite format as Shen-san mentioned, and get accepted at the Appendix 8 of SPDX 2.2. And license information exchange sub-work group discussing about the how to share the license information between the organization, the companies on the supply chain. In the real business, some sort of the embedded embedded software product developed by many companies, organizations, which cooperating as in the supply chain, which upstream a software provider, a software supplier, and downstream software integrator, and final, for example, car manufacturer integrating such embedded product into the final product, and distributed those products to the market, and end user will use such embedded software product. So as of today, we supply chain company have to manage the many license of the many software package on the product. However, in current situation in the supply chain, many challenges existing for exchanging license information between the organizations. For example, many items required in the license information, such as the name of open source software, version of the original source code, etc., etc. And sometimes some part of those open source software might be integrated with the proprietary software. So the license information format is have the quite many variety of the format and style of the license information. Sometimes it's written in the contract paper, a physical paper, or just a letter concluded in the software package, or any other way in various formats are used in current real business. These differences may cause the difficulty for providers to create and manage those license informations. So our sub-working group discussed about how to solve those issues on the supply chain in the real business. We are decided to discuss before having discussion. We have to achieve the machine readable integrated format for the license information exchange. And also, it's able to generate by handwriting style, such as the input through the spreadsheet and converted into human readable format. Because the sometimes software package is binary and proprietary software in the real embedded software product. So in the supply chain, supply side have to provide the license information at the same format as the other open source license software package information. And the integrator side have to manage those various license information in the integrated manner. So our sub-working group defined, utilize the essential part of the SPDX as to realize easiest way to OSS and the proprietary license management on the supply chain. We picked up the mandatory field of the SPDX at first, and we discussed about the which part have to be added on such essential part. We picked some optional tags, such as it corresponds to software package name or something like that, and additional commentary field, such as the license comment or package comment. The field in the SPDX Lite have been defined correcting from actual business use cases, such as the car manufacturer and in-vehicle entertainment system, and some part of the visual tool or something like that. So the SPDX Lite have been well defined to represent license information in the real business. And it's accepted as the official SPDX definition from the SPDX 2.2. However, it's already starting utilization on the real business. Toyota requested license information as with the SPDX or SPDX Lite format to suppliers. I'm the member of the Renesas Electronics SoC vendor, so I also generate the SPDX and SPDX Lite format to hand over our software package to the downstream side. In the conventional way, contract document are only one license information for proprietary software, and the source code itself are just distributed to the downstream company when we distribute open source software. So downstream side have to read the all source code or scan to read the license tool like a FOSOD by the downstream side. However, SPDX Lite or SPDX able to manage the integrated way as an abstract of each software package license, able to handle open source software, both open source software and proprietary license on the integrated way on the to the development of the embedded software product. In addition, when I found the another special merit, special pros of the SPDX Lite. Sometimes software company distribute software package combined with the proprietary software and open source software into the single software package, especially some part of the reference example software consists from open source software to evaluate proprietary package. In those cases, current existing license scan tool like a Fossology cannot generate concluded license. But when we use the SPDX Lite as a handwritten license information, we are able to generate this part is proprietary. This part, another part is the sample software, so it contains open source software. So in real business, not only the simple structure of the single license for single software package, but in real business, combined license software package exists, and SPDX Lite is able to utilize on the such this license information description in the real business. That's all of the my presentation, and right now we are asking to some persons to review our document, additional document named guideline through the GitHub. So please make a comment for current draft of our SPDX Lite guideline. Thank you for hearing my presentation.
Thank you, Ito-san. So throwing open the room to anyone, if you have a question, please do jump in. If you don't have a question at the moment, I've got a couple for you, Ito-san. All right. The question I'd like to ask, first of all, is how many Japanese companies are involved in either using or planning to use SPDX Lite in their supply chain?
Mm-hmm. As of now, just started to the utilization of the SPDX Lite in real business, but Toyota requested the each supplier to provide the license information. So supply chain for Toyota consists from many software companies like Panasonic, Denso, Denso 10, and Renesas, and many companies join in the single or a few supply chains. So each those company will use SPDX or SPDX Lite as a real software development business.
Thank you very much, Ito-san. That makes a lot of sense. The second question I have is that I remember the discussions in Japan talked about how using spreadsheets for SPDX Lite is going to be pretty common. Do you think that's particular to how the Japanese companies approach this, or do you think it's more broadly something that is also likely to be seen a lot in, for example, China or Korea?
Yeah. In the some sort of the small company or these software provider who make a single specific software product, those who person might be used SPDX Lite format through the spreadsheet format, because the in the existing those relatively small but key manager, key player in the supply chain are using as a contract document as a license information in the current or conventional business scheme. Those written in paper style supplier able to easy to use those spreadsheet style license information when they require machine readable format from downstream side, I think. So those the proprietary software provider will be expectedly will be use these spreadsheet style license information.
Thank you, Ito-san. Very clear. Alrighty. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, if there are no other questions at this stage, thank you very much indeed, Kate. Thank you, Ito-san. Much appreciate this chance to talk about SPDX 2.2 and SPDX Lite. This webinar has been recorded as usual and will be shared widely with the global community. We're expecting quite a lot of interest on this because as our community moves towards automation, the software bill of materials is pretty critical, and the vast majority of our community are using or planning to use SPDX. So thank you again, Kate and Ito-san, and we're going to wrap up this webinar now with an Any Other Business section. As part of this Any Other Business, I'd just like to flag that I've been working on calendar cleanup. So all of the old OpenChain calendar invitations should have been removed from your calendar. If not, please delete them manually. And moving forward, our OpenChain webinar invitations will be sent through and managed by groups.io. So there should be an invitation from groups.io to everyone on the mailing list. And you will also get reminders of these events from groups.io prior to them occurring. Big thanks to Jim Hutchinson for flagging this issue and SC confirming that he also has the same consideration on his calendar. Hopefully this will fix it for all parties. Does anyone else have any other business today? All right.
Hi, Shem.
Oh, hi.
This is SZ, and I have one topic that happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you, SC. That's very nice of you. Yeah, 40 years old, so now it's time to contemplate what comes next. Hopefully more exercise and more lovely travel once the world wakes up again. So that's it. Thank you all indeed. No, Jim suggested we sing in chat. No, Jim, we don't sing. Before anyone gets up to anything too nefarious, we're gonna shut down the webinar and go home. I'm gonna have a coffee and then consider eating some chocolate as a birthday treat. Thank you all and talk soon.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, and happy birthday, Shane.
Happy birthday, Shin.
Oh, happy
Bye-bye.
birthday. Bye bye.